Okay, let's go ahead and continue our study, and let's go ahead and tackle the portion in the book of Job. So, Jimmy, last time we presented this material, I had said that the book of Job does mention sons of God as being angels. I think I said that in our last video together. That's because I hadn't studied it too much, and I need to let people know that I've changed my mind on that after looking at it more. The principle that we've read in Romans, and the principle that we've read that simply states in Romans 8:14, John 1:12, Philippians 2:15, John 1:3, 1 John 3:1, 1 John 3:2. That's just to name some. We could even go on. Those principles, I believe, are airtight. I believe that it's talking about the phrase "sons of God" as those in covenant with Him. And I believe that's true throughout the whole Bible. So I had to re-examine Job and consider it without having a bias and to read it just as the text presents it. And I came to a lot of the same conclusions as I did in Genesis by following the author's flow of thought. So let's look at the author's flow of thought in Job and look at these different mentions of sons of God and see if it makes sense. So let's go ahead and first examine Job chapter 1, because we see the phrase being used here in verse number 6. So let's work our way up to that and look at the author's flow of thought again. Jim, if you don't mind, I'll just kind of sketch this out for us. In verse number 1, the writer says, "There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was perfect and upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil." The word eschewed kind of means to despise evil even before it makes its way to you. It's a premeditation of righteousness before the evil comes to your doorstep. It's really stating the fact that Job cared about righteousness. That's why it talks about him. He's a perfect man. He fears God. This is pivotal for our understanding of the story of Job. "And there was born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters." So you have a guy that is in covenant with the Lord. He loves the Lord. He fears God. And he has 10 children, 7 sons, 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep. And it goes through all of these things that he owns. Verse number 4, his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone, that Job sent and sanctified them. Let's pause for a moment. Who is the them? The them is the sons of Job. So it was so that when the days of there is the sons of Job, when their feasting were gone about, then Job sanctified them. That's his sons, his 7 sons. So he rose up early in the morning. So how did he sanctify them? Remember, this is Job it's not in order in your Bible chronologically. But the book of Job is contemporary with Genesis. This is way before Abraham. And so it says here, this is how he sanctified them. Job sent and sanctified them, rose up early in the morning, offered burnt offering according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts," and thus did Job continually. So we see in verse number 5 that Job loved his kids so much, Jimmy, that he prayed for them. Imagine that. A godly father who loves his kids, he prays for his kids. In the same way that you and I would pray for God's protection over our children, Job feared God, eschewed evil, a man of righteousness, and he made sacrifices on behalf of his kids, that sins they may not even be aware of. That's how much he loved them. And so he was basically the high priest at this time, if you want to say that. He was the mediator of his family, the patriarch Job, and he is going out in the morning and he is making offered burnt offerings according to the number of them. In other words, for each one of his sons, he did this. And his reasoning was, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. I want to make sure they're protected from God's wrath. I care about them." So Job goes out and he does a sacrificial ceremony to cleanse the sins of his sons. Now we get to verse 6. "Now there was a day when the sons of God," what did we say the sons of God was this whole time? Those in covenant with him. Verse number 5 shows that Job made sacrifices on their behalf. What happens when a sacrifice is made on your behalf? You get in a relationship with God. So verse number 6 starts with, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Why can't I take that as those in covenant with God? That's how it's used everywhere else in the Bible. Here we have the whole point of this so far is there's a righteous man who made sacrifices for his sons. So it says here, verse 6, that there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. Kind of a strange way of saying it. And the Lord said unto Satan, whence comest thou? In King James here, where'd you come from? And Jimmy, isn't that really the question? Where is this happening? Is this in heaven? Because if it's in heaven, then it's not Job's kids that are going in. This is not Job's children, sons that are walking around in heaven.
Right.
But God asked Satan, where'd you just come from? And did you know Satan gives us the answer? Then Satan answered the Lord in verse number 7. He said, from going to and fro in the earth and from walking up and down in it. Where'd you come? I'm just walking around on the earth. Jimmy, this took place on the earth. The sons of God are the people in covenant with God. So here's what's happening, I think. I think you have, and by the way, all I need to do for the sake of our study is to make this just plausible. You can disagree with me. All I have to do is present this, and by the way, I will promise you, nobody with the ET view is starting at Job 1:1 and doing context like I am.
Yeah.
They just go right to verse 6 and say, see, Satan's with them. This is heaven. No, wait a second. There's a righteous man who makes a sacrifice for his sons. Then the words sons of God are used, and they're used to present themselves before the Lord. And the weird part is Satan came with them, and God's like, well, where'd you come from? He's like, oh, walking up and down on the earth, to and fro, walking up and down on the earth.
Well,
That is significant.
Not only just that, but it reads like they were partying with their sisters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not going to be going on in heaven either.
Well, sure, but the ones that would be the proponents of the ET view say there's a break in verse number 6, and it's a totally different. See, that's
saying there's a break.
Yes.
Okay.
Just like in my opinion, a lot of bad teaching has invisible lines in the text where they cross stuff out and say, before this line, this, and after this line, this, like Revelation 3 and 4. The rapture is between those two.
Oh, and
it doesn't say that, but
and the whole the gap in the 69th and 70th week.
Gap in the 69th, 70th week, and I'll throw one else out there that I believe is false. That's the gap theory between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2.
Yeah.
It's not there, but it's a nice theory that people like to build on. So yes, they put a gap between 5 and 6. That's the only way they can get it to work. And that's why I'm doing context, because the context of verses 1 through 5 destroy their case. And then, so you have, I'm glad you said that. So folks, if you look at your Bible in Job 1 through 5, everyone agrees that that's taking place on the earth. I've never heard anybody say that's not taking place on the earth. And then you have in verses 7 and 8, you have the earth mentioned. Where were you? In the earth. Well, have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him in the earth. So earth is the context of 7 and 8. So earth is the context 1 through 5 and 7 and 8. Nobody would disagree with that I'm aware of. So doesn't it make sense that 6, the beginning of the paragraph, is actually a worship service where those that are now in covenant with God, the sons of Job, are presenting themselves before the Lord. And Satan walks in among them. Where have you been, walking to and fro on the earth? Look what else it says in verse number 9. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, doth Job fear God for naught or for nothing? Hast not thou made a hedge about him, about his house, physical term, earth term, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, work, physical, earth term. His substance is increased in the land, but put forth thine hand now and touch all that he had, and he will curse you to your face. Now look at this. And the Lord said unto Satan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. That phrase, the presence of the Lord, is an interesting one. A lot of times when you are on the earth, that's a tabernacle phrase. That's why I wanted to go slow there. When you're talking about the tabernacle, people are before the presence of the Lord. I wouldn't push this point too hard, but when you have some examples in Revelation, when you have people are actually before God, it says they stood before the Lord. Both small and great stood before the Lord. It just says they stood before the Lord. But when we have this tabernacle idea in the Holy of Holies, it's the idea of the presence of the Lord. Moses was before the presence of the Lord. But when you see him face to face in some visions, you're standing before the Lord. When Paul says both small and great will stand before the Lord, here they're before the presence of the Lord. I wouldn't push that point too hard, but I do think that it's interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
Let's move on. The next time we see this is in Job chapter 2. And we see it again in Job chapter 2 in verses 1 and 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. So I think that is those that are in covenant going into a worship time or some sort of a time. This is the reason I'm sketchy on is because it wasn't explained to us.
Right.
But this is way before Moses. This is before Aaron. So whatever they were doing, it was some sort of a worship service before the Lord. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. Can you believe it? God is helping us this much with this study. He says in verse 2, where'd you come from? Whence camest thou? Satan answered, and he said exactly where he was. Where'd you come from? He said, from going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. So we have the exact same wording. Both times are connected to the earth. And by the way, when it says he goes out from the presence of the Lord to go and tempt Job, it just almost kind of seems like he walks out the back door. He's not traveling from heaven, trekking down to the earth. I don't think anybody that's of the ET view believes that Satan is omnipresent. I don't think they believe that he can instantaneously appear somewhere. He doesn't have those kind of powers. So when you take this, I think it's pretty straightforward.
So is God coming down on the earth then to be in the presence of the? I mean,
well, God's omnipresent.
Right.
So when he was in the burning bush with Moses, he's standing before the presence of the Lord.
Right.
That's what I was saying about that phrase, presence of the Lord.
Right.
It's like he can manifest himself in the Holy of Holies. That's the presence of the Lord. But in Revelation, or when Paul's talking about the judgment, he's talking about the judgment, he says phrases like, and they stood before the Lord. Not the presence of the Lord. They stood before the Lord. But in these instances, the presence seems to be a part of the earth where he's specifically put his presence in, like the Holy of Holies, and like the believer in the New Testament, where our bodies become the temple. We house the presence of the Lord.
Satan has taken on another, I don't know. In my mind, he's with these scriptures, he seems to just be another created guy with a job that God has given him or something. It doesn't. He gets portrayed as almost co-equal with God, and they're always battling, and they're trying to beat the other. Satan sounds totally subservient, and he's just got a job to do.
Yep. And his job is Genesis 3:15. He's trying to make sure that the seed of Eve, which he is following, does not come to fruition, so that his head doesn't get crushed.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of the Bible. That's why Herod starts killing little babies. This is why Moses had to be put into the ark of the bulrushes. Pharaoh's killing babies. That's all demon possession. That's all satanic oppression, trying to kill the seed. It's all the serpent seeking the seed. This is what Revelation 12 is. Go back and watch our Revelation 12. Revelation 12 is all about Israel's about to bring forth a child, and the dragon is sitting there ready to devour the child before it's born. This is the story of the Bible. It's the whole point of the Bible. If you look at verse 7 in Job 2:7, it says, so Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. Now look at this. We're in the same sentence. So he goes forth from the presence of the Lord and smote Job. Doesn't sound like there's a lot of traveling there. Sounds like he walked out of a building on the earth. Same sentence. Doesn't say anything about traveling back to earth. or he left heaven. This is all preconceived ideas read into the text. You have to take an outside thought and put it into the text. As I've already displayed, according to the flow of the author's thought, nobody would dispute, I don't believe, that Job 1 through 5 is on the earth, and Job 1, 7, and 8 are on the earth, and everything else. And 6 somehow is in heaven. That's not in the text. And I don't think anybody would dispute that Job is on the earth at the end of verse 7. So you have a huge trek here for a spiritual being that, as far as we know, can't instantaneously appear somewhere. He's limited. So he left the presence of the Lord and he smote Job in the same sentence. Sounds like he walked out the back door and went and found Job.
Yeah.
So I think at least I would say this, those that are listening to this that are shaking their heads saying you're absolutely wrong, I would just say this, to be fair to my position, you have to agree that it's plausible that the definition that we already read in Romans and that Jesus gave us in John, Romans 8:14, that if you're led of the Spirit of God, you are a son of God. These are the sons of God. Those that are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God. If I use that definition, you have to agree with me that it does work. It is possible for people that are in covenant with God to go in his presence on earth. And for Satan to be on the earth, he said that's where he was. I have way more contextual proof on my side for this position than to pluck out Job 1:6 out of its context, say, well, that part's in 7. Or Job 2:7a is in heaven, but Job 2:7b is on earth. I'm not doing that. I'm saying it's all on earth. So you have to, even those that are disagreeing with me, would have to agree that it's at least plausible. And I think actually, according to the context and just biblical data, I think it's overwhelming in this favor.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next place that it's used in Job chapter 38. Now, it must be noted that Job chapter 38 is beginning this section where God is speaking to Job. And this, now all of Job, by the way, I should have said this at the beginning, Job is poetry. Job is considered poetry as far as genre. If you don't know what genre you're reading, you have a disconnect between yourself and the author. A lack of understanding genre you will not understand the point of the author. We are reading poetry. And so in poetry, it says in Job chapter 38, let's go ahead and read it because this is all important. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? What he's saying is, Job, you're going to bring a shadow on my counsel, and you're doing this with words, and you have no idea what you're talking about. Words without knowledge. Darken my counsel with words without knowledge. So he says this, okay, let's play a little game, Job. You think it's okay for you to darken my counsel with words without knowledge? Okay, do this. Why don't you pull your pants up there, big boy? I got some questions for you. Verse 3, he says, gird up now thy loins like a man. I will demand of thee an answer, and answer thou me. Verse 4. So he says this, where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast an understanding. The very first thing he goes to, Jimmy, is the foundations of the earth. This is very important for our study. Very first thing he does, he goes timeline-wise to the beginning of the foundations of the earth. He says, now I have some questions about the foundation of the earth. Verse 5, who hath laid the measures thereof? If thou knowest, who hath stretched the line upon it? Now these are both questions about the foundation of the earth. Who stretched a line? Who has the plumb line? Who made sure it was straight? Tell me, how does this practically work out? What's the construction of the foundation of the earth? Then he says this in verse number 6, where upon the foundations thereof fastened, or here's one more question about the foundation of the earth. He says, who laid the cornerstone thereof? Cornerstone, that sounds familiar. What's the theming in the Bible on cornerstone? Well, that's Jesus. I think we all understand that. Let's go to Matthew chapter 21. Jimmy, if you could read, if you have that handy. Matthew 21, verse 42. Jesus is quoting Psalm 118, verses 21 through 23 in this passage. That's important because, and you know this, Jimmy, because we just talked about this on Sunday at church, but Jesus is quoting Psalm 118 because it's the last of the Hallel Psalms, the praise Psalms, that section from 113 to 118. And they did that as they were working their way up to Passover. So this is the last section of Psalm 118, getting ready for Passover. In preparation for that, Jesus quotes it about himself getting ready for Passover. Here's what he says.
Jesus saith unto them, Did ye never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner? This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes.
So is it possible, if our theming is correct here, that God is questioning Job on the foundations of the earth and the central figure of the creation of the world, Jesus Christ? That's exactly what he's doing. Job, you don't understand. You've darkened my counsel without knowledge. Job, I got a question for you. What is the big deal of the cornerstone that I laid from the foundations of the earth? Now, some might be listening to this saying, wait a second, Ken. Jesus was born in Bethlehem about 3 BC, thanks to some people who got the calendar wrong on Herod's death. How could we be talking about Jesus if we're talking about the foundation of the world? Now let's read verse 7, the verse in question, and I'll answer that question. When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. By the way, sons of God shouting for joy based on the foundation of the earth doesn't really sound like fallen angels to me. But this is now the ET view switches and says, oh, no. These are pre-fallen angels. These are good angels. Well, then what's the distinction with the Ben Elohim? If it means something and you can't even go to the Greek with it, it can mean either fallen or unfallen. It can mean either demons from the pit of hell, or it can mean perfectly fine angels worshiping God. The same Hebrew phrase means either. Doesn't really sound like a contextual case they're making. Kind of sounds like an outside theory they're imposing on the text. Because here, the sons of God are clearly not fallen because they're worshiping the Lord, because the cornerstone was laid on the foundation of the earth. Now, let's try this on for size. This is clearly not a fallen angel. So they have to switch hats and go, oh, no. This is pre-fallen. These are good angels. Okay, well, that already is not consistent. But let's see if what I'm saying is consistent. Is it possible that the sons of God here could be the people of God in covenant with him? Well, it says here that when the foundation of the earth was made, there was a cornerstone involved, and the sons of God shouted for joy because of it. Could this really mean people that are humans in covenant with God? Remember, this is poetry. Why don't we let the New Testament interpret this? Jimmy, if you would, let's go to the book of Revelation in chapter 13 and verse 8.
And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
Whoa. When was Jesus killed?
Before the foundation of the world?
What? So I thought Jesus was killed on Golgotha in AD 30.
Me too.
But that right there is saying that those that don't worship the beast or his image, but are found written in the Lamb's book of life, are worshiping a lamb that was slain from the foundations of the world. How does that make any sense? God's plan for redemption was in place before the foundations of the world. And in Job chapter 38, he's questioning Job about that. Job doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. And so in poetry, the sons of God, in poetic language, are worshiping God when they see the crucifixion and resurrection of the chief cornerstone. That's us in heaven. We weren't born yet. That's God's point. Job doesn't even understand it. And so the writer of John from Patmos is saying that the Lamb of God was slain before the foundations of the world. And it's the people that are in the Lamb's book of life that will worship the Lamb slain from the foundations of the world, not on Golgotha in AD 30 from the hand of the Romans. This has been the plan of God since creation.
Well, let me ask you something. Why does
Sure.
that Revelation scripture say whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb? What am I
Because
missing there?
Go back and look at the beginning of chapter 13, because it's talking about the damnation of those that are worshiping the beast in his image.
Okay.
So you have two people groups talked about in Revelation 13: those that are worshiping the beast in his image, and those that are not worshiping, and they're written in the Lamb's book of life. So covenant, not covenant,
Okay.
godly, ungodly. So if you read it again, you'll know. And I know that's a little confusing. I debated whether to say that context, but since you asked it, then if you read the verse again, you'll see that there are people that are worshiping the beast, and there's people who are refusing to worship, and those are the ones that are in the Lamb's book of life, which was the Lamb slain from the foundations of the world.
Okay.
Does that make more sense? Looking at it.
I knew there was a
Yeah.
context thing. I was just this one verse pulled out by itself. You know?
and doesn't that really prove our study tonight? One verse pulled out is pretty confusing. Yeah. So
wow.
that's what I think Job 38 is talking about. If you go from verse 1 through verse 7, and by the way, if you keep on going, you see all the poetry. Look at verse 8: who shut up the sea with doors. The sea doesn't have doors. I would like for somebody to show me the door that God put on the sea. And by the way, when that door breaks forth as if it issue out of the womb, I made the cloud like a garment thereof, thickness of swaddling for it. I break it up for my decreed place and set bars and doors. I would love for somebody to show me bars and doors on the ocean. This is poetry. The clouds are like simile garments. The genre here is poetry. You should be aware. You should be very, very weary of anybody, cautious of anybody who takes poetry and makes it doctrine. Remember what we want to do: interpret the unclear with the clear. What's the clear? To them gave he power to become the sons of God. If you're led of the Spirit of God, you are the sons of God. Clear. This is unclear. This is poetry.
Well, maybe the writer, he goes in and out of poetry and literal stuff.
Well, there's always an element to that where you're saying you're saying some literal, but when the text itself lends to a figure of speech like a simile, if I say I'm hungry as a bear, the word as is a simile. So I may be saying I'm literally hungry, but I'm using a figurative term to use a simile, which is a very hyperbolic, another figure of speech. I'm exaggerating my hunger, comparing it to a bear. So that's how the Bible uses this. God literally made the world, and it literally is amazing, and Job literally doesn't understand it. And I'm going to say it in very figurative, poetic ways. So figures of speech are not throwaways. You just have to understand them in the context as the author intended them.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to a couple other things before we close out this one. Another thing that the ET view violates is a very simple principle, and I call it the after their kind principle. When God made the world, he made everything with its DNA or its seed, and this is very important. They're made after their kind. You've never seen an orange grow on an apple tree, and you've never seen a dog give birth to a skateboard. You've never seen something bring forth not after its kind. The ET view violates this. They're saying that something that was different than a human mated with and produced something non-human. That's not bringing forth after its kind. The women on the earth would have brought forth something not after their own kind. That's a violation of the biblical principle of after their kind. So let's just read a couple of these. I think people understand what I'm saying. But Genesis 1:21 and 25.
And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And verse 25, and God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good.
And then now we get to Adam, because that didn't talk about people yet. Talk about trees, whales, birds. But let's talk about Adam. What kind was Adam? He wasn't an animal kind. He wasn't an herb kind. He wasn't a vegetation kind. What kind is Adam? Let's look at Genesis 1:26 and 27.
And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them.
So the template for Adam was God. We're made in his image. And
After
then
our
what do we
likeness.
read? After our likeness. And what do we read in Genesis 6? We read people producing people. Even their verse that they hang all their weight on, verse 4. Well, sons of God, daughters of men, what did they produce? Men. So saying it's something different than that violates this after their kind principle when you bring in an extraterrestrial idea with a half-breed.
Mm-hmm.
It actually, I will tell you this, Jimmy, the reason I wanted to do this video is not because I want to prove anybody wrong. That's not my motivation. My only motivation for this is those that I have seen that are pushing the ET view, it's actually messing with the gospel. Jesus came to redeem people because of their own sin. The flood happened because of the wickedness of man. Those are violated with the ET view. You know, in politics today, we don't have undercover Nephilim going on in Washington, D.C. I'm not saying there's not satanic influence, but what I'm saying is you have people who are wicked. And, you know, you don't have to look behind somebody's eyes and wonder if they're Nephilim. I think we'll close this video, Jimmy, if it's okay with you, by just looking at the word itself, giants, because I think this is important.
Yeah.
Because after all is said and done, I think I've given more than enough biblical evidence. And by the way, we're not even close to done with this study. We'll do another video where we're going to go into Jude. We're going to go into 2 Peter. We're going to go into other topics of this because we have the Rephidim. We have other mentions of they're just like I kind of gave away some of it when I talked about 10 were bad and 2 were good. We're taking the unfaithful witnesses' word for it and not Joshua and Caleb's. It's just I can't believe when I hear people defending this view from the 10's point of view and not the 2's point of view. It literally, I'm like, you're cutting your own knees off here. It's really mind-numbing.
I just always viewed that as, well, Caleb and Joshua just knew that it didn't matter how big they were, that God was going to cut them down anyway.
Well, you have Eeyore. We've all been around Eeyore. And you don't really want to listen to your Eeyore friend too much because you're not going to want to go on in life. Eeyore sees the worst of everything, and they're defeated by everything. You can't really take what they say too seriously because Eeyore's already defeated. And we are like grasshoppers, by the way. Again, well, let me just ask you. Let's go through this real quick. We are like it doesn't. We should look it up. Can we look that up real quick on the fly?
Yeah.
Okay, because I believe there's a simile in there.
Well, well, you've already said it.
Well, I think, but I want to be right about it because I believe that there's a simile in there. So this is Joshua and Caleb, right? So do you have can we look up where the reference is?
And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight.
So okay, let's play a little game here. The game is, can you find the simile? What's the simile in that verse? And we were in our own sight
as.
Simile.
Yeah, as.
That means they weren't literally like grasshoppers in their sight. It's not a comparison saying, folks, if you look at a grasshopper and you look at a man, that's the difference between us and them.
That's what I thought all these years.
It says we are as grasshoppers. And so we were in their sight. They're exaggerating for emphasis to say they're bigger than us.
How would it needed to have been worded to be actual? We are. There's no way to even say that, though, is there?
You could say that they are a certain amount of cubits. Yeah. When we get to the king, remember there's a king I can't remember his name off the top of my head. There's a giant king. I believe he's somewhere around Goliath's height. We know his bed was about 13 feet long, and it
Yeah.
actually gives his cubits.
Yep.
We could give cubits like we did for Goliath,
Yeah.
but they didn't do that. They just made a huge deliberate exaggeration. And by the way, we'll get into this in the next video because I don't want to stray too far. I just want to show there's a simile there. So you have 10 ungodly people that know they're going to be defeated, and they use a simile for exaggeration. This is not for us to get out a calculator and say, okay, a grasshopper is a half inch, a man is 6 feet. So, oh, wow, this is like them being, but we'll do this in the next video. We'll get into this stuff more.
Okay.
But by the way, you know what I never hear anybody talk about that's the proponent of the ET version is the actual math that you do to see how tall somebody would be according to First Enoch.
Mm.
I've done the math on it, and we're not talking about people that are 20 feet tall. It's just people that are 2 miles tall. It talks about L's. We'll get into L's in a little bit. And there's a discrepancy on whether it's this or 10 times this. But my friends, look up and see how long an L is, and look at First Enoch and see how many L's these giants were. It's like 2 miles. It's
Wow.
not 15 feet. So we're in total Jewish mythology. We'll get into the Jewish mythology in the next verse. Okay, so after their kind. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 6, in verse number 4, we're almost through. Genesis 6:4, we get to this word giants. This is interesting. This is interesting. We know what who the Rephidim are. Rephidim is a Hebrew word. So when we get to the Rephidim, it's a Hebrew word that's transliterated into English. In other words, when the King James translators got to Rephidim, they said, you know what? That's somebody's name, and we're just going to leave it as Rephidim. That's how you say it in Hebrew. That's how you say it in English. That's their name. But for some reason, Jimmy, they got to this group right here in Genesis 6:4. And by the way that you would say this in Hebrew is something like Nephil. The Nephil, if people want to do a little study on this, it's in the Strongs, it's H5303. Look up H5303. You'll see that it is the word Nephil. Now, Jimmy, here's why that's fascinating. The word Nephil means fallen one. It's from the root that just means to fall, the fallen ones.
See, there's those fallen angels.
Yeah, well, that's how they would use that. But the thing is, you have those that are in covenant with God, and you have those that are in Adam.
Mm.
Adam fell in the garden.
Yeah.
It's very basic, very, very basic Bible stuff.
Mm.
So in the Hebrew, so let's go back to this. So you have the Nephil, and that's where we get Nephilim from. Why did the King James translators come to a similar thing with Rephidim and other similar names? And they just translate the names. But here they went with giants. Why did they do that?
I don't know.
Well, here's why. Because when the King James translators got here, they also looked at the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation. We've already mentioned it, 250 BC, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. They pulled this word, gigantes. Gigantes is the Greek word in the Septuagint for giants. They pulled gigantes out, and they just simply gave it an English name, giants. They pulled it from gigantes. Who are the gigantes? That's the question. Who are they? Why did the Septuagint translators 250 years before Christ take Nephil and say gigantes? My friends, this is very important. Gigantes is Greek mythology. And they are known for being very good fighters. They're very good fighters, and they're known for being tough and strong. They're known for being bullies. I'm talking about the gigantes in Greek mythology. And so as the translators of the Septuagint were coming through Genesis 6, and they were seeing these mighty men that were produced, and they had a negative connotation. The wickedness of man was only evil continually, and God brought the flood. They were trying to communicate that these were bullies, that they were good at fighting, that they were strong. And so they said, the Nephil are like the gigantes. And so they put the word gigantes there. The King James translators pick up on this, and they don't use the Hebrew word. They use the Greek word and say, and there were giants in the earth in those days. There were gigantes in the earth in those days. They were the fallen ones, the Nephilim.
Well, and they follow that up with men of renown, right?
Sure.
So as you were just saying all that, I'm thinking, wait a minute, the way we talk today, if somebody's really famous, we might say they're huge.
They're big, yeah.
But it doesn't mean they're tall as the cedars of Lebanon. So, and they're famous. They're huge.
Yeah.
So that's kind of probably what was going on.
They're just known for being very good fighters and very much of a bully. And so I gave you a picture a little bit earlier. I don't think Wikipedia is the greatest academic source in the world, but Jimmy, if you could put on the screen at this time, there's a picture I want to show folks. And go ahead and look at this. This is a screenshot of Wikipedia, and you look at this, and you can do this. Go ahead and you Google this, and just Google gigantes, which is gigantes, and you'll see a Wikipedia page. Go ahead and pull that up, and you'll see this. I have it as a screenshot right here, and this is the gigantes. That's the exact word used. If you go ahead and look at Blue Letter Bible or anything that you look up for your lexicon, look at Genesis 6:4. You'll see Nephil as the Hebrew, but go ahead and look at the LXX and bring up the Greek translation of the Septuagint, and you will find the Greek Septuagint uses gigantes. Now, this is what we're talking about in Greek mythology. Ironically, after all that we've said in this video, the word giants from gigantes in Greek mythology, and you'll see it right there, right in front of you, they are known for fighting. They are known for being bullies, and it says it right there, but they are not it doesn't necessarily mean that they're tall, necessarily. Weird. Because when I think of Andre the Giant, I think of he's tall. Now, the gigantes that they're talking about in Greek mythology could have been tall. It doesn't preclude them from being tall or huge. It could have been part of their makeup, but not necessarily part of their makeup. They're mostly known for being good fighters and bullies and ungodly and that sort of thing, taking what they want, more like pirates, you know. But just ironic, isn't it ironic after all this talk? It's ironic, isn't it, that in Greek mythology, the gigantes aren't even necessarily known for being tall. They could have been, but that wasn't the characteristic they're most known for. They're most known for being good fighters, which is exactly what exactly what Genesis 6 says. They're men of renown, because they're mighty warriors. That's why the Septuagint translators use the word gigantes, and that's why the King James put in their giants. We think of giants as only one thing, huge, but that's not the meaning that we have in gigantes. So ironically, after all this study, chapter 6 and verse 4 says, after these two entities got together, they produced men. And even at that, gigantes doesn't even necessarily mean big. I mean, it's just a house of cards. It's really bad. It's really, really bad teaching. I would just say this, Jimmy, that it is unnecessary. I forget unbiblical. I think it's unbiblical too. I think it's actually close to heretical, because you actually have Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection in play here. And you have the express purpose of the flood is being completely ignored here and lied about. But this is an unnecessary teaching. This is mythology. It's not in the text. It's a thought from outside of it. So I'm going to recap and finish this video this way. Jimmy, I would like to go ahead and say this, that those that believe in the ET view, in order to believe in the ET view, I believe you have to violate the following 11, and I'm going to add one for extra measure at the end, but I'll say you have to violate 11 biblical principles we've outlined in this video. Number one, I think for those that believe in the ET view, have to violate, number one, the flow of thought by the author. We talked about from Genesis 1 through 5, especially hitting chapter 3, verse 15, that there's a separation between these two lines. It was men's problem in chapter 6. We have the lines being talked about in 5. We have a man. Eve got a man from the Lord in Genesis 4:1, and in Genesis 4, was it 25:26? He said, I got a son from the Lord. The author's flow of thought is totally ignored and violated with the ET view, completely thrown out the window. Number two, we have the man and son relationship I just mentioned in Genesis 4, totally violated, totally ignored. Like, it doesn't even matter that Cain's called man. Doesn't matter that Seth is called son. It's just like, well, that means absolutely nothing. We're not going to use that knowledge to go forward in the story. We're just going to ignore it. Number 3, the reason for the flood. The Bible expressly tells us the purpose of the flood was the wickedness of man. It's not because of an ET. It's the wickedness of man. Number 4, the Bible states clearly in Genesis 6:4, it states that the Nephilim were men. It's their best verse. It's their best verse. And it actually says in the verse, they produced men. I don't know. The fifth biblical principle that you have to violate to get to this is the idea of the principle of after their kind. Everything brings forth after their kind. It violates that principle. This is something that's of another kind, mating with something of another kind, and producing a third kind, a half-breed. We don't see that in the Bible. The Bible says that God made his creation to bring forth after its kind. This violates that principle. It also violates the context of Job 1, 2, and 38, referring to the people of God in covenant with him. It also violates that Jesus says that the angels do not marry nor give into marriage. The eighth biblical principle it violates is the writer of Hebrews stated that God did not say at any time that any of the angels were a son of his. He says he didn't say it at any time. That's why Jesus is more superior than the angels, by the way. He's more superior because of a relationship. Jesus is the Son of God. It's a relationship he has with God. And it's through the power of Jesus that we are given the ability to become sons of God. You say, do those who believe in the ET view really want to tell me that the demons that got kicked out of heaven, that belong in the pit of hell, that are evil of evils, God looks at them and says, there's my sons? Do they look up at heaven and say, oh, Father, we hate you? That's their relationship still? Father and son? Getting close to blasphemy, in my opinion. When you think of it that way, we're really close to blasphemy. I don't know what the actual definition of blasphemy is, but when you're calling something in the pit of hell God's son, that's a problem biblically. To me, that's a problem. The ninth principle you have to violate to get to the ET view is that Paul said the sons of God are those who are led by the Spirit of God. Are the fallen angels those that are led by the Spirit of God? Oh, Ken, you can't use the New Testament to interpret the Old. Yeah, I can. I'm a Bible-believing Christian. That's how I know who the Lamb of God is. The 10th biblical principle you violate with the ET view is that Jesus said he came to give men the power to become the sons of God. And if somebody wants to say, oh, well, that's the New Testament, remember, Jesus was born in the Old Covenant. So technically speaking, the New Covenant doesn't start until the upper room. So yes, it might say New Testament on your Bible, but that doesn't actually become New Testament economy until the upper room. Jesus was born in the Old Covenant. And he said, in his words, that he came to give men the power to become the sons of God. Is he talking about giving them power to become fallen angels? Nope. He meant for them to become in covenant with him, in a relationship with him and the Father. The 11th biblical principle you have to violate to believe in the ET view is the entire biblical narrative is a fulfillment of Genesis 3:15. It's about a division between the godly and the ungodly line to bring about the Messiah. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of the genealogies. It's the whole point of the record of the seeds. That's what Paul was saying in Genesis chapter 3. And that seed, he says, it is not many seeds, but as to one seed. He's very clear on this issue that the seed is Jesus. And I'll throw in a bonus one because it's extra biblical, meaning outside of the Bible. And that is just the plain definition of the gigantes, the Greek word that the King James translators were using when they said giants. It doesn't even necessarily mean size. It mostly means good fighters, which is actually in the text, that they are mighty men of renown. That's actually in the text, and that's the primary usage of gigantes. So in our next video, we're going to touch on, I think this needs to be talked about, Jimmy, if you're okay with this. In our next video, I'd like to talk about why is the ET view dangerous? And why does it need to be corrected? Because believe it or not, Jewish mythology was big business in the intertestamental period. Between the books of Malachi and Matthew, there's 400 years, and the Jewish people were like, where's this Messiah? And they got no answers. And the Greeks were taking over the world. Alexander the Great conquered the world, and the world was Hellenized, means it was Greekified. I always say that. It was made to be like Greek. It was Hellenized. And all of a sudden, those that are waiting for their Messiah, they're stuck with this antiquated book about Abraham and the serpent and this garden. Oh man, the Greeks are onto mathematics and they're onto science and they're doing all this Greek mythology and it's just all this wonderful stuff. And those that are out of covenant with God, they take the Jewish scriptures and they mix it with Greek mythology. That happened in between the testamental period. Did you know that Paul addresses this? Did you know that Jesus addresses this? They fight against these ungodly Jewish people that mix the Hebrew scriptures with Greek mythology, coming up with Jewish mythology. And they talk about it in the New Testament. In our next video, we will point out where there is a huge warning to stand up against people that mix the Jewish scriptures with Greek mythology. That's exactly what First Enoch is. And I'll show why it says they're 2 miles tall in that. That's an embarrassing fact for them. We'll go into all of that in our next video and why I think this ET view needs to be corrected and why I believe it's actually dangerous when we talk about the gospel, that Jesus came to save people from their sin because men were wicked and need a savior. Jimmy, as we close this video, I just really want to take a moment, and I know I get super passionate about theology. I can get really excited about study. I think as we all can, I think if you put time into it. I just want to make sure I end by saying this. I do not in any way want this video to come across as mocking those who have a different view or that I'm making fun of those who have come to a different conclusion. In anything that I've said in this video, I want it to come across with love and humility that I do believe that what we presented is the biblical view, but that I in no way, and I know there's going to be people watching this that probably disagree if they got this far in the video, that just to know that this is a secondary issue, I guess you could say, an in-house debate, if you can say. And I, those that are watching, I just want to just approach this with some grace and say that, this is something we should be able to talk through and enjoy Bible study. But I in no way want to come across like I'm mocking people, because this is one of those topics people put a lot of time into and they can have a lot of emotion with it too. So I hope folks can at least see my heart on that. In the times in this video, if you see that I get passionate about something or I laugh or I'm smiling, it's more me thinking through the position than the people. I love people. And I want people to know that if I come across that way, it's only because I get excited about the topic. But I just wanted to make sure people understood my heart on that.